Oh my goodness, Dre's adding to the script at the last minute. What's he doing, Brian? Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, known most places as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, Dre? I'm excited for this late script edition, and lots of good play going on in the NBA tonight. We got some good stuff to talk about.
So our major topic of the day is going to be the hot hand, kind of. And I'm going to spoil this preemptively for you, Brian. It's just an excuse to talk about me, but is my podcast. It is what I do. But you know what, Brian? I am very excited for something. We are going to go into the land of, respectable podcasts. We actually have a sponsor. So we're finally up there. And you know what? It's not a mattress. It's not Audible. It's not a place that sends you food. It is a cloud-based optimization solution. So we're going to be talking about our sponsor, sunshower.io. This is the copy I wrote, Brian. So, listeners, give us feedback if you don't like it. Anyway, do you have a cloud-based solution, or are you interested in one? Of course, many cloud platforms like AWS, Heroku, DigitalOcean, etc. mean you have limitless options for getting your solution to the cloud. But are you sure it's configured properly? Are you sure you're spending the right amount of money? Do you have multiple solutions that you want to be able to easily monitor from one website like this host? If so, then sunshower.io is what you're looking for. They'll help you customize a cloud-based solution from scratch if that's what you're looking for. Or if you've already got a huge cloud-based solution, they'll help you optimize it to ensure it's the most efficient and cost-effective it can be. If you want to check them out, go to sunshower.io/nerd numbers and tell them I sent you. Well, the URL will tell them that I sent you, but you can do that too. And I'm actually excited about this, Brian, because we're actually messing with them at the moment. As mentioned, Boxscore Geeks is a cloud-based solution. I have lots of other stuff. It's gotten to the point where there are so many different, this isn't copy anymore. This is me just speaking off the cuff. There are so many things now where, if you're a hobbyist that wants to put something in the cloud and you wait a couple years, there are 3 new things, and you don't know the right way, and there are so many config things. So things like this popping up are definitely useful and helpful because it's just so much work to try and get a solution to the cloud at this point. And my son just ran into the door because we shut the door on the podcast room. I guess he wants to make his cloud-based solution as good as it can be too. I'll let you get the final word on that, Brian, and we can get on to basketball.
No, I mean, hey, if the link is up, then that means it's official. So good work, Dre, and that's pretty fun.
Okay, so that's the official sponsor of the show. Let's just give an unofficial shout out and try and help some ratings. So I just want to make sure I get this right, Brian. I don't know if you saw it, but our good friend Chris Ye is actually going to be on a reality TV show.
That's right.
And I just want to make sure I get it right. It's called Mental Samurai. So Chris Ye is going to be on a show called Mental Samurai. The premiere is coming up, so it's premiering tonight. Actually, it'll premiered by the time you see this episode. Actually, it premieres March 19th. So if I get off my butt and get this show up, Brian, it'll be premiering tonight. So premiering Tuesday of this week, March 19th. I guess. I don't know the full logistics of the show. I haven't watched it beyond, the 30-second ad with Rob Lowe. But Chris Ye is going to be on it, I believe, April 30th. So first off, you can just watch it every week, get caught up, ensure it's on the air. And then we'll have to see if we can do something, Brian. Maybe you and I can find a way to stream it or whatever and watch it live as it's going on.
That would be fun. That'd be fun.
But yeah, I'm really excited to see what Chris Ye can do on the show. He's been everywhere. This year, obviously with we talk him every other show with his book Blitzscaling that he co-wrote with Reid Hoffman, and now he's going to be a reality TV star contestant on a show about being brainy. So don't let us down, Chris. And if I would be shocked, but if there are any basketball related questions, because that's what Rob Lowe says, it's they say 12 simple questions, and it looks like they have a gyroscope, so it's almost like they're going through NASA training while then asking questions. So I'm guessing off the cuff here, so apologies, Chris, and anybody else if I'm getting this wrong, that the goal is you want to mess with someone physically and then see if they still have their brain on them to answer trivia questions. So if there are any basketball-related ones, Chris, especially Lakers, if you get those wrong, you'll hear about it forever. And it's already been recorded, so Chris knows ahead of time if that'll happen.
Yeah, I saw that 30-second spot as well after you or Chris had mentioned it to me, and so that was interesting. I was looking for him. He did not appear in that ad, but if he's airing on April 30th, that's, a month and a half from now. where it's the March 18th right now as we record this. Maybe that means he did well. Maybe they show the guys that do well later on the season. I don't know. I'm guessing, but good luck, Chris, even though it's already happened.
We'll definitely find out. Okay, so as mentioned, our normal format of the show is we do Last Week on Lost. That's reviewing any comments that we have. Then we hop into a litany of subjects we have around the NBA, and then our big subject. And we only have like one big subject. It's not honestly that big, but it lets me talk about movie grosses, the hot hand fallacy, etc. So there's really only one comment on an article this week, which was on the top box scores of the week that I put up late last week, if that makes any sense, Brian. But Iceman234 asked if there should be two different forms of all NBA teams, an on-ball team and an off-ball team, because he basically says then players like Giannis, Ben Simmons, Harden, Davis, Jokic, that's a very obvious on-ball NBA, has the ball team. Well, centers like Gobert, Jordan, Capella, I'd say Drummond for sure too, would be kind of on the off-ball team. And I love this, and I always bring up, this is a subject that I've talked many times, Brian, baseball versus basketball, and I always come back to it. There is an interesting difference in basketball and baseball and other sports too, where there is a defined set of differences, offense versus defense. Football, of course, being, the biggest, right, where you only play one type. And I've always wondered if the basketball problem is because players are expected to do a little bit of everything, you do essentially just always focus on offensive players, even in the defensive realm, right? Even players like Dennis Rodman, Ben Wallace don't get the same respect. The comparisons I've made in baseball are like Mariano Rivera, a relief pitcher, and then I would also say like David Ortiz, who I'd almost call David Ortiz kind of like a Klay Thompson. He only does one thing. He was a designated hitter, but I think I was looking at Baseball Reference, and obviously David Ortiz is going into the Hall of Fame by all of their numbers. I think he's going to be first ballot, and I'll be interested to see if he's unanimous again like Mariano Rivera. I think splitting up the game a little more would be helpful. And then another suggestion I've made to basketball, and apologies, it's shedding season in here. So if you see me kind of like sniffing, like my dog shed in the podcast,
Spring is here.
I'm going to have to get an air purifier or something in this room if you don't want to just hear me sniffing, and I'm getting over a cold. So apologies for that. But I've thought that if basketball copied baseball and had an MVP, Rookie of the Year, that kind of thing for each conference, it would solve a lot of problems, because when basketball started, there were 8 teams. When the NBA started, there were 8 teams. And there was one MVP. And we've moved on since then. And now we have 30 teams, and we still only have one MVP. If you have 2 conferences and an MVP for each conference, a Rookie of the Year for each conference, et cetera, that solves a lot of problems. Like this year, you just go Giannis and I'd say Paul George. Those would be my 2. James, actually, that's rough. I think James Harden surpassed Paul George, right? So you do James Harden for the West, Giannis for the East. That would be kind of my take. So yeah, I
agree.
I think there could be a lot done for how awards and accolades are handed out in basketball that I would like to see done just to help get some players respect. Because exactly like Iceman is saying, Gobert is just not respected because he's not a quote unquote high usage player. But that's ridiculous, because I think you've made this joke in baseball, right? Like, only respecting pitchers or only respecting batters. It's any true baseball fan is like, that is ridiculous, right? They both matter. Now, how much both matters, fine. But yeah, in basketball, we respect the players who hold the ball. It would be really nice if we started doing more stuff to do the players that do all the other things.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about this perception later on with the hot hand. But I've been going back and forth as to whether or not I agree with Iceman here or not. Because on the one hand, and you just talked about this, it does what this idea would do is combat perception, right? That, it would say, look, it would force people to say, hey, we got to pay attention to these off-ball players. So it's like training wheels, maybe that would be a good thing. But on the other hand, we already have all the tools we need, even in the box score alone, to kind of evaluate, to use the word magnitude, the magnitude of production for both of these types of players. So I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't need this at all, but in the real world, would it be useful? Maybe. But I'm not a fan of awards in general anyway in sports. It's just kind of lame, and it gets tied to salary sometimes, like all-star appearances, which is stupid. So I don't know. I don't like any of this stuff anyway.
Well, a comparable I'll give you, sadly, and this will come up later in the show as well, is looking at awards in like movies and music. And so, as you know, like on Oscars, there's a Best Actress category and, supporting, etc. And on the one hand, you go, do we really need that? You say that. And then you look at the Grammys and women do not get the awards at anywhere near the rate of men. And you go, oh, yes, we do. So it's kind of to what you're saying. It's like in a perfect world, we don't need this. I'm almost a fan of just adding stuff like this to make sure that players we think deserve respect get it, because it's like, it occurs to me, Brian, I didn't put it on the script at all, but the fact that there is a college scandal this week and it has nothing, we're heading into March Madness. There's a college scandal.
Yeah, we should talk about this college scandal a little bit.
It has absolutely nothing to do with basketball. And I think I made a flippant tweet where I said, I think it'll be amusing if colleges basically stop accepting dark money from rich people before they start. Wow, I could really flip that to sound racist. I don't want to, but before they start spending money on college athletes, which is kind of amusing. For those that don't know, there was an FBI sting on a bunch of high-profile rich people, essentially like celebrities, including she was from Full House. I forget her name.
Yeah, so the two Hollywood actresses involved were Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman, yeah. Although, interestingly, William H. Macy, her husband, did not get nabbed, so I guess they couldn't prove he was involved. They didn't have enough evidence, but yeah, it's interesting.
Because, so in this, basically, these high-profile celebrities paid money to get their kids into school. Now, where it's key, the reason this is a scandal is what they essentially did is things such as getting their kids listed as having learning disability such that they could get a privately proctored SAT test. And then in the privately proctored SAT test, they would have the SAT proctor either correct or fake the answers such that their kid would get the better SAT score. Apologies, Brian. I hope I don't have to cut out early just because of like pollen and sickness. But anyway, so that's why it's a crime, because I think most people have known rich parents just give money to schools to get their kids into school all the time. And even reading up on this, do you know the name better than me? Because there's a big name fixer who's talked a lot about all the people who've approached him for doing this, was saying that the reason that people like Huffman and Loughlin, I think, is that right?
Yeah, Lori Loughlin, yep.
Lori Loughlin approached him is basically they were going, we know we can give the school a donation and increase our kids' chances, but we want certainty. We want to know for sure. So we're going to spend to guarantee our kid gets into school. And so that's why it's kind of amusing, right? Because from a moralistic standpoint, we can agree the pay-to-play way that colleges work, which has been around forever. Let's just be clear. There is no meritocracy in the United States. I'm going to get back to that point in a second, too, with another story I know. There's not a meritocracy. Rich people have been able to spend money to give their kids advantages forever. I like that Dave Barry, he talked a little bit about this. I know it's very in vogue to basically say, oh, millennials, kids these days. It's like, no, this has been going on forever. But basically they said we don't have the certainty.
Yeah, let's point out it's all the parents getting indicted. None of the kids have been.
It's the parents getting indicted. And I mean, that's been, I know we brought this up on the show before, Brian, where I kind of went off on a rant that didn't connect to anything once on millennials. And there was someone in the comments section of twitch.tv who's like, I'm not here to listen to you rant about millennials. So this is a sequel to that. But the point being, like you were just saying, in this college scandal, it's the parents saying we want our kids to get into college that are breaking the rules. In the everyone gets a trophy generation, kids don't have authority. When kids say, I want a trophy, when kids say, I want sugar, whatever, you just stop. Yeah, I just said you heard my kid at the door trying to get into us podcasting. As an adult, when you have a kid, you part of being a parent is saying no.
Yeah. And
so there are parents that can't say no, and that's the problem. But I would also stress, I think this has been around for a long, long time. I think things like social media, the fact that we can see it, right? I mean, we're seeing a couple of names mentioned, Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are more clever about this that have been doing this for years.
This is just who got caught this time from this one guy that was running. Well, he got busted. The main guy got busted for racketeering. So these are just all the people that were connected to one guy, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because it's part of the problem, but we on this show talk a lot about the issues with colleges, and we normally approach it from the sports angle. They take in lots of money to produce essentially a professional sports league, and then they don't distribute that money equitably. They basically give most of it to the coaches or spending it on useless facilities that no college really needs and refuse to pay the players, then use BS excuses to pay the players, and then get huge shoe deals. And we see things like Zion Williamson where, he potentially injures himself and risks multi-million-dollar NBA career because he has to pay for free because they put this needless gatekeeping thing in place, but is what it is. So I can't even remember how we briefly got off on the tangent about the college athletics. Just, it is there, which is bizarre. And then just the last note on like the no true meritocracy, I'll say pseudo sports, and because I like talking chess, apparently an 8-year-old refugee won a statewide chess tournament in New York.
I saw that.
And what I'm forgetting who, I'm not going to find him in time. I apologize. I might put him in the show notes, which may or may not go up this week. So we'll see. But basically, someone said this isn't an uplifting story. And I do want to agree with that point where we've said this before. When you see stories like kid does a bake sale to raise money for his mother's cancer funds, or someone puts up a successful GoFundMe for their bills, or a bunch of coworkers chip in their PTO so, a mother's maternity leave can go extended. That's not a feel-good story. That's a BS story. But what's also key about it
Even
is
the CEO of GoFundMe, Dre, just recently said he thought it's bullshit people do medical fundraising on his website.
Well, I think by the bullshit, what he probably doesn't mean it's bullshit that people do it. I think he's like this shouldn't be.
That's right.
He's like this is a thing. Like I think in the early days of things like GoFundMe and Kickstarter, like the big ones are like, I have an idea for a really cool cooler, and I got this is interesting, Brian. Somewhat related to basketball. I got a suitcase that I really, really like, actually. It's called Trunkster, and Mark Cuban endorsed it on Shark Tank. And it took like 2 years to get it. I was really happy with the final product. But that's also a funny thing about GoFundMe and Kickstarters is people don't realize when you're like, I've got this idea, I need some funding. Sometimes getting too much funding screws you because now you have, you probably could have done 1,000 orders, fine. Well, when you get 1 million orders, now that distribution company in China you found that was like, yeah, we can get those ready. You can get 1,000 units in a month. You're like, we want 1 million. They're like, yeah, that doesn't scale linearly. What are you? We can't just make the factory 100 times bigger. But anyway, the no true meritocracy, the issues with that. It's like, yeah, money has always been a key component. And then people who are able to bypass access has always been a key component of our society. It's depressing. Is what it is, but I figure I'll see if we can find a subtle way back to sports. Brian, do you want to talk the box scores of the week, or the Clippers, or the Warriors? I'll let you take first crack at the sports topic to go.
Yeah, we can go into box scores of the week. I do want to talk briefly about the college admissions, though.
Let's hear more. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like you bring up the meritocracy point, and that's been one of the positives of this. I think is people bringing that up again. And, it's been it's been almost 10 years now since, Chris Hayes' Twilight of the Elites, which is, was about that topic. So it's good to get that back.
So apologies, refresh me on that. I know Chris Hayes.
Well, he wrote a book called Twilight of the Elites in 2011, 2012, something like that. And it's about how meritocracy is bullshit, basically. So it's just been, it's good to have this idea back in the news. I know you talk about it all the time, especially because I mean, I don't want to get into this now, but I'll just say that you've talked about in the past how you worked in hiring at Google and they espoused meritocracy but never really practiced it, right? And that seems to be a common theme. So, and again, I don't want to get into that too much, but that's just, one of those things, right? And one of the things I heard recently in relation to the story is that the term meritocracy was, and I forgot about this, it was originally a derogatory term meant to, that the concept of it was always known to be bullshit, especially by the person who invented the term. And right before he died, he said one of his failings was the fact that the term was stolen back by the other side to mean a positive thing. So briefly on the admissions, though, it's interesting because one of the best tweets I saw about this, and I forgot who it was, so I'm just going to subtweet them. Maybe someone can remind me. But it was basically something to the effect of this story really surprised me because I didn't think that rich people could ever get busted for paying money to get their kids into college. I thought it was just all legal, and in a lot of cases it is, right? So the sports angle is kind of a weird bridge to this. And here's what I mean by that. So one of the most famous rich kids who was documented having this kind of behavior by his family was actually Jared Kushner, right? Donald Trump's son-in-law. There was a book written, and again, I can't remember the name of the book, but a book written about this. And he was a character in that book even before Trump had ran for president, right? And so his family, gave a few $1,000,000, and I don't know what happened. They, named a building after him or whatever that. Sure enough, Kushner got in, right? Like you said, guaranteeing them getting in. So, Felicity Huffman, William H. Macy, they're actors. They probably have a lot of money, but they may not have as much, as these super rich people that can buy a building to get their kids into school. So they have to, apparently they're using these other methods, right? The NCAA. And so the fact that the NCAA is corrupt is the vehicle here. That's all the point I'm trying to make, is if the NCAA wasn't corrupt, they wouldn't be able to do this.
So to refresh that too, as I mentioned, one of the key scandals is that they basically did things like faked disabilities for their kids to get proctored SAT exams. You're right too. Another entrance is they basically said your kid is a rowing athlete or something, right? And then just never showed up for the team.
That's the way it worked. Is this kingpin of the operation had a corrupt sports coach, like Division I, scholarship sport, like you said, crew or sailing is another one. And they had, at least one coach at each of these schools. And it was just bogus, right? They're just making up fake athlete profiles for these kids. And the coach is like, yep. It's like a no-show political job. That's part of political corruption is you have these no-show jobs. That's almost what this is like. It's like a no-show sports athlete, coming into the school. It's really interesting.
What's kind of funny is I've watched my fair share of really bad sports movies, including like not even direct to video, like direct to Disney. The Disney Channel has a lot of these. And there was one where a girl wants to go to a preparatory school as a figure skater, and she can't get in. So they get her in on a hockey scholarship, but then she winds up playing hockey. But like originally it was the same stupid premise where the figure skating coach gets the hockey coach to agree to put her on the squad, even though she's not going to play, but then she ends up being forced to play and then ends up being good at hockey. It was not a good movie, but it's fun. It's funny where you're talking about some of this stuff, and a lot of these things have been like bad movie premises, and even it's funny with like the parent doing anything. That meme is amusing, where yeah, you see parents do this, and like the parents doing anything for their kids, and you see where it kind of crosses the line. I'm more shocked on this whole thing that like, yeah, the same like rich people getting caught for this. I'm just kind of more baffled that it happened. I'm still processing that because I just would have not assumed it would happen, but we'll see where it goes from here. I don't have much more than that actually on it.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a big anti-elite sentiment right now, and this feeds into the narrative for sure. I think that's why it's such a big story.
Although ironically, this one should fit more with the mainstream media of like the apprehension of getting your kids into college and all that. One thing that came up with William H. Macy what gets weird is they're going back in time to old interviews of these people. And William H. Macy was talking about show business and basically saying, hell yeah, he'd use nepotism to get his daughter into show business if he could, just because that pays money. And we see stuff like that. Like, I'm a huge fan of Kevin Smith. I'm a fan of Will Smith. Both of their kids have gotten acting jobs that, at least based on their skill, they probably would not have gotten otherwise. They would not have, their debut movies would not have been for that amount of money, etc. But they got them. But it's like, I think we all inherently understand that if you can game a system to your advantage or to your legacy's advantage, you will. And I do think it's important that we realize that. There on the Daily Zeitgeist podcast, I was really happy when someone brought this up. They said sports is not a meritocracy, because that's definitely true too. There's this idea that the greatest athletes will rise to the top. It's like, well, if you have to find your way into programs where you get the top training, or programs where you compete against the best or will be scouted to the best, there are entrance criteria that you might not be able to have that other kids will have an advantage against you on. And I think it's more important that we recognize that and ask, should we be fixing that? This was a point in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. I believe it was Outliers, where he's like, Canada loves hockey, and their hockey system only really looks at kids that are, at least the top kids, really looks at kids that are born in the first quarter of the year because of their age restriction. And it's like, if we want better hockey players, we should have multiple leagues running year round, so that we're not just looking at the biggest kids, we're actually looking at the best kids for their age bracket.
So just to clarify, they're going to have an advantage against other kids for just that 1 year, basically because they're older than them for half a year, so they'll be bigger, right? That's what you're trying to say? But that's short-sighted, because the smaller kids could be just as good.
But then where this gets really funny is, I think he calls it the Matthew principle, where it's based on like a Bible verse, where the point is, when you get a small advantage to start, this is very compound interest. When you get a small advantage to start, it builds on itself very quickly. So if you're the best kid on your hockey squad at age 5, you're terrible. Let's just be clear. Any of them, I could beat a 5-year-old. I can't really skate that. I can't skate backwards. I can't skate that well. I don't have good puck handling skills. I'm going to be arrogant enough to say this, although, damn it, there's got to be some Canadian kid. I'm retracting this immediately. There are kids in Pee-wee hockey that I could beat one-on-one because I'm a giant. There's some 5-year-old somewhere that can destroy me, I'm sure, though, actually. But at a 5-year-old, they're not good. They're not anywhere close to that level. But if they're the best kid in their class and they get advanced training and et cetera, and better equipment and better time and more attention from coach, then not only are they better at age 6 because they're still a little bigger, they've got that extra year of practice and time. And then by the time they're age 18, that's just been year after year after year. So sport, to the point of like not a meritocracy, so many things like this, and we're seeing the exact same thing with Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin, and the college admission scandal. There are so many little things that are an advantage into getting into college. Being able to beat either beat the SAT by having tutors that actually tutor you and you learn the right way to take the SAT, or in this case, just cheat. Being able to beat the SAT is a huge part. Knowing who to talk to, right? Having certain connections, all this stuff. You can game your way into college, and that you can't fool yourself into thinking that's a meritocracy, especially when it requires so much outside help, and that's the advantage so many people in these schools have.
Oh, yeah. So just briefly before we move on, I hadn't heard that William H. Macy comment, and that's really interesting. It reminds me of what Scott Brooks said about LeVar Ball. Remember that? He said, everyone hates LeVar Ball for getting up in his kid's business, but, my dad wasn't around when I was a kid, so I like LeVar Ball for doing that. It kind of reminded me of that a little bit. You know what it also reminds me of, though, and I think a lot of people are saying this, so this is not an original thought at all, but William H. Macy being involved, isn't this something one of the characters in one of his movies would do, Dre? Like, can't you see Fargo, William H. Macy involved in a plot like this, and he's in over his head? That's pretty funny. So, anyway.
And I did tweet about this, so kind of last tweet that I made about this. I guess it's the bank robber Willie Sutton. So we were like, why do you rob banks? And his answer is, that's where the money is. So did the other, like, on this entire the exact point Scott Brooks made about LeVar Ball, the exact point, like when you're like, why would they cheat? Why would they spend millions of dollars to get their kids into an Ivy League school? And you're like, because that degree is worth it. It's like, this isn't stupid. I had a college professor who noted that, excuse me, with how infrequently blue collar crime, at least at the time, hopefully this changes in the future, but how infrequently white collar crime was prosecuted, and even how limited it was, how it wasn't irrational to do white collar crime. How if you can get away with it, it's worth so much money. It's the same thing here. It's like, even after all this stuff's coming out and we're discovering all the things they did, I'm like, that degree's worth the money. Excuse me. All right, let's get on to basketball, Brian.
Yeah.
I don't have time. One good piece of news from last week's show, Brian. I said I'm a huge fan of Isaiah Thomas, but it's not his year in Denver. Denver has a good squad. They don't need Isaiah Thomas playing. He arguably cost him a couple of close games. He's been shut down. The Nuggets roster is set, and they're doing good. They've won 6 of their last 10, and are nipping at your heels. The stupid Warriors.
My Warriors. Yeah, let's.
I
That's
was
what
gonna say,
sports talk is all about, Dre.
why don't you talk about
Tribalism.
Warriors for a bit? I'm going to mute myself and then cough myself out and then come back.
Okay. Yeah, so let's get into the top box scores of the week. So one of the things I was saying to you, and we were chatting about before the show, or maybe it was yesterday, I don't know, is I feel like this game yesterday from Giannis, that you have your top box score, ridiculous game overall, but it's notable he put up 52 points in 36 minutes. And although they did lose to the 76ers, the Bucks did, in a pretty good game. I just feel like a national TV game, on Sunday against a high-profile opponent like that, I just feel like this is really sewing up the MVP for Giannis, just in terms of he's actually going to win it for sure now. And we think he does deserve to win it as well, but I feel like a high-profile 50-point performance, 52 points to be exact, that's really significant in the voters' eyes.
Yeah, I mean, as a reminder, back in the day, this is one of our. Actually, it's not. I don't know if it's top 3. So I'm going to talk about an MVP that I was not a fan of. But I don't know if on my list of hated MVPs it's my worst. But Kobe Bryant in 2008 beat out Chris Paul for the MVP. But essentially going down the stretch, the Lakers played the Hornets, and Kobe Bryant outplayed Chris Paul in that game. And I think to what you're saying, the voters use that as a decision. I noticed a funny thing. So the NBA has set a record in recent years. I forget what the benchmark is, obviously post Wilt Chamberlain days. But there were 11 50-point games this NBA season, and there's a big graphic like Stats or NBA or ESPN, one of those sites, put up a graphic with Giannis's, dunking, and it says we, set a record for 50-point games in an NBA season. And some people astutely noticed that, yeah, James Harden is responsible for over half of those. So, but I think you're right. From a narrative perspective, this really helps. I'm not saying anything is for sure just yet. As an example, on the box scores of the week, which as a reminder, every week I find my 5 top box scores. The best game of the week is always included in there, but 5 top box scores and then 3 bad box scores. And then just arbitrarily, I've been using MVP voting criteria. So if you're the best box score of the week, I give you 5 points, 4 points, 3 points. Giannis has a really sizable lead now, where essentially for James Harden to overtake him, he's going to need 2 weeks at a number 1 spot, with Giannis not getting better than 3rd, and there's 3 to 4 weeks left of the regular season. So that's
just to clarify here, Dre. Giannis and Harden both have 8 list appearances, but Giannis has 8 more points in your system, and that's because it's like ranked choice voting, basically, right? If you get the top box score, it's worth more. Is that right?
Exactly. And I mean, it's worth noting to both of those players as kind of an impressiveness. I'm taking 5 box scores of the week. There have been 22 real weeks, and I'd say 21 because what I did, the All-Star break had 2 shortened weeks, so I just consolidated those. There have been 21 weeks of basketball that I've been doing this. They're each on there 8 times. That's ridiculous. That means that in any given week, there's like a 1 in 3 chance one of them is going to be one of the best box scores of the week. That's how good those two have been playing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been, for Harden, it's been really kind of unique, historic numbers, I think, with his offense and the number of isolation plays and all that. So that's been really interesting. But then for Giannis, it's just been greatness, right? Like he's on the best team and he's having the best year overall in the league, because I guess his defensive impact is greater than Harden's. So yeah, it's not a bad choice to go with either one of these guys, but I think Giannis is the clear best player.
Well, like I said, if this was baseball, I'd just give each of them an award.
Yeah.
All right. You've got it. You're going to pat yourself on the back for the Clippers.
Oh, yes. So I was happy about this. I saw on Reddit there is a streamable clip. The link is broken now. So I'm going to assume Reddit's not lying to me and that this was once a real clip. But basically, Pat Beverly was asked about his meeting with Clippers management after the Tobias Harris trade. And what he said was, it was solid, meaning the meeting. I just asked questions. Are we tanking? They said no, and they were right. They got the pieces necessary, and we've been solid ever since. Yeah, and the Clippers look good. And the reason I'm patting myself on the back is when the Clippers traded Tobias Harris, and they made one other move too, I think, in addition to getting Zubats out of free agency. What I said was I thought the Clippers might have had a slightly worse roster after these trades, but not significantly worse, not enough to knock them out of the playoffs, and that they should just gain these assets and still, have a similar playoff run than they would have before. So I like those trades, and I think that's bearing out. They don't have a lot of big stars. Maybe Beverly is the closest to that. He's had a really good year. Gallinari's fallen off a little bit, but has also had a great year. Harrell has looked good as well. So they just had a lot of and Zubats as well too. So they just keep going strong. They don't have stars, but they have a lot of solid players. That's not a kind of a team that'll do any damage in the playoffs, right? You want a shorter rotation in the playoffs, but it's good for the regular season, and I think it's the best way to put them in the best position for next year. If they luck into a star in free agency or in the draft, they could all of a sudden be a team in contention next year. So I love what the Clippers are doing, and they're looking good.
And then what I was going to say about that's kind of important is so that they got three players. They got Mike Scott, Landry Shamet, and Wilson Chandler.
Shamet's the other one, yeah.
Shamet's been playing really well. He's improved, which is basically a bonus. As small forward, he's playing about the same level that Tobias Harris was playing. And then the other key is they're not playing Wilson Chandler, because we always worry about that. When a team trades for a bad player, we don't know what's happening. So that was kind of the question with the Clippers. When they traded Tobias Harris, my thinking was he is a perfectly good player on this team. They're a playoff team. He can help them this year. And you basically, if you've got a good shot at the playoffs and you've got a player that might be overplayed next season, you worry about that next season. This seems to be doing okay in large part because Shamet is basically is replacing the production of Harris, which is huge. And then they're not playing the bad players. And then, of course, the fact that they got Zubats. I didn't know that was going to happen, too. The Lakers being just stupid with Zubats is what it is. So, yeah, I'll give you credit there, because I remember when this happened, I was a little more dour. I was like, this is a great move for the 76ers. And for what it's worth, like, to your point in the 76ers, there were two different flavors of how to win a basketball game. There was the Giannis is the new LeBron flavor. Giannis did everything. Giannis was the Bucks that game, and they barely lost. The 76ers had like four good players. I think that game, Tobias, I think in order it was like Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, or something like that. Those four guys all did really well. And that's one of the scary parts about the 76ers now with Tobias Harris is they are really strong 1-6, like you were saying, the playoff rotation. One thing we didn't really have on the script or discuss, but that's rough for the Bucks. I asked this on Twitter this week, Brian. I said, is Malcolm Brogdon in the most improved player discussion? Because I was shocked to discover that, as I've mentioned before, we thought he was a reasonable NBA player that deserved Rookie of the Year, but that said more about the Rookie of the Year class than about Malcolm Brogdon. Nothing personal, Malcolm Brogdon. He was like a senior that came in and played above average, whereas we've seen players like Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, that just Ben Simmons out of the gate. You're like, oh my goodness, Luka Doncic. Although Luka Doncic has been tailing off. I've got thoughts on that. Might not make the show. We said Brogdon's a good player. And that had been kind of his MO for 2 seasons. This season, he is freaking great. Now, a funny note on that most improved player comment, Brian, is examining the Bucks, he would actually fall behind Giannis still. So I think Malcolm Brogdon deserves most improved player consideration, but even just on the Bucks, he's still behind Giannis. I think Giannis could be most improved, most valuable defensive player of the year. I would have no complaints if he swept those 3, to be honest. So that's just the state of the Bucks. But the Bucks have lost Malcolm Brogdon for the year, and that's rough. I think another one that's frustrating is Brook Lopez is playing. I would kind of put him in Lance Stevenson territory. He's a fine player. He's a replacement level player. He is not the same caliber as some of the other bigs in the NBA, and he's a starter. So come playoff time, you're in an interesting position now where you have just lost one of your legs that was a great player, and one of your starters is weaker compared to other starters. That's going to be interesting. Although the Bucks, Ty Willinghams and I, both Wisconsin residents, were looking back and forth. The Bucks are a historically good team, but the frustrating part about that is just looking at Bucks history. The last time they were this good was in 1986, and they lost to a little team called the Celtics. So there's a very real chance if, say, the Warriors come back healthy, the Raptors, don't forget that, Kawhi has been on and off. They have been resting him. They have been very Shaq-like with Kawhi.
He does have a load management day today as well.
Well, yeah, for those that don't remember, Phil Jackson was very open about this, and in his books discussed it more, where with Shaquille O'Neal, his goal with Shaquille O'Neal was not to be a 60-win team every year, which with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe in their primes arguably could have been easy. His goal was to ensure that Shaquille O'Neal was healthy come playoff time. So Shaquille O'Neal under Phil Jackson the last couple of seasons, the last couple of those three-peats, last couple of championships in those three-peats, he was playing like 60 games a season instead of playing 70 or 80. But that makes sense because you get to the playoffs, Shaquille O'Neal's healthy. And for instance, the 2000, I believe it's either 2000 or 2001, one of those 2 years. Shaquille O'Neal is just, I think it's got to be the one where they only lost one game. So I think I was against the 76ers. I think that's 2001. Shaquille O'Neal is ridiculous in the playoffs. So if the Raptors with Kawhi are doing the same thing, they're like, you know what? We don't need you every game. If you and Kyle Lowry come back healthy for the playoffs, that's scary. The same is definitely true of the Golden State Warriors. Possibly true of the Houston Rockets. Don't forget, Clint Capella's been injured. I've noted the same, too, about the Nuggets. This was one other comment, not on the script, Brian, but I'll throw it out there. I'm happy I was wrong about Paul Millsap. I still think Paul Millsap is overplayed, but his numbers say he's a good player, arguably very helpful on defense, according to kind of some of the anecdotal stuff I've seen, and a key component to why the Nuggets are doing so well. And my argument I've made to you is, I hate overpaying players unless they march you into that contender category. Now, arguably, there were better power forwards. See the fact that Montrezl Harrell is like nothing and doing amazing, and I think you probably could have traded for him. But Paul Millsap's playing amazing. The Nuggets are a contender. Paul Millsap wasn't healthy the whole year. Gary Harris has been out some of the year, etc. So there are a lot of teams that haven't been healthy. So there's a very real chance that the Bucks could get knocked on the nose in the playoffs, but at least right now they're a historically good team. But now, basically, I would say they were one of the healthier contenders throughout most of the year. Now they're starting to run into, with Malcolm Brogdon getting injured, potentially with Brook Lopez being older, this could be a problem come playoff time. So we're just going to have to see what happens.
Yeah, and no, you're right. Like the team that's the most injured, well, so we've said this a million times, right? If you look at the Warriors versus the Cavs facing each other in the finals, what has it been 4 years in a row now, something like that? Anyway, the first time the Warriors won, Kevin Love was hurt, Steph Curry was healthy, and Bogut was healthy. The next time, Bogut and Curry were hurt, and Kevin Love was healthy, so the Cavs won. And just, it's such an easy line to draw, looking between the health of your stars and winning. Like, it's got to be one of the most easy, obvious correlations around. I think as far as the Bucks, though, they're just loading up with so much talent. They picked up Mirotic. He's probably going to be really important for them with guys out. And they picked up Pau Gasol, too, right? He's probably a much better player than Brook Lopez, even though he's in his mid-30s. He was pretty good on the Spurs. He probably can't play enough minutes, though. Brook Lopez is interesting, though. So I dug up this Kirk Goldsberry tweet from, I guess it's from 2 days ago now, the 16th, when you mentioned him. And this is very standard Kirk Goldsberry stuff, right? Where we love the charts and how they look, but we don't necessarily think the content tells the whole story. But look at this, shot chart, Dre. It's called the Metamorphosis of Brook Lopez. He has gone from shooting 1% of his shots from three-pointers for his career to 66% of his shots from three-pointers this year. So he's really just improved his shot selection tremendously, and that's how he's gotten, all this credit, right? The problem is, though, if you look at his overall production, it's still basically the same in aggregate as it's been for his career average, He's had better years than this, he's had worse years than this. this is about average. And why? He just doesn't do the big man stuff. He doesn't rebound. He does block shots, which is nice, but he's a limited player, and he is who he is. So the Bucks should not depend on him in the playoffs.
We've talked about this a lot, about the impressive but not necessarily being good. In the NBA, like you're saying, he shoots a lot of threes. Having a good shooter, and Brook Lopez is like a 59% from, essentially, because as you're noting, from three shooter, is very good. The NBA has had inflation on shooting efficiency. In the modern NBA, 56% true shooting is the baseline. So Brook Lopez's true shooting is a little under 60%, so still very good, although a lot of bigs are close to 58% plus. So the issue with Brook Lopez is you essentially have a decent to good shooting guard as your starting center. And another interesting thing, he's really good at block shots, but it's weird where we talk about, impressive versus valuable in magnitude. Rebounds are boring. People hate rebounds. I think it is interesting. I saw someone tweet the other day. They're like, what's one thing about modern day NBA that is still overlooked? And I wanted to say rebounds. It's like Dennis Rodman led the NBA.
And you talked about free throws as well, Dre, which is another non-sexy thing, right? People can miss both of those.
Yeah, but at least for big men, the reason I want to focus on rebounds is I was going to say he's really good at block shots, but a block shot, as you probably know, right, a lot of times what happens with a block shot is a player just misses the shot and they regain possession of the ball because of how the rules work. If I shoot the ball, Brook Lopez hits it and it goes out of bounds, the team gets the ball back. Now, a shot that could have potentially gone in did not go in, which is definitely good, and the numbers bear that out. But it is not as valuable as a player misses a shot, Brook Lopez just gets the ball. So it is impressive what he's doing, but it is a weird strategy to say, I want my starting center to basically be a shooting guard. And we've talked a lot about this before. Now, one thing he's got going for him, and we have kind of noticed this bear out in the numbers, is 7-footers, just by default of being 7 feet, tend to be pretty good at defense just because it's hard to shoot over a 7-footer, even if they're not trying. The numbers on like Andrea Bargnani, for instance, used to say that he would out-rebound you and out-D you if he was in your vicinity. He just sucked at getting in your vicinity. And I think Brook Lopez is actually at least decent at getting in front of you on defense. So he's not bad from that front. And it's just, what you should always look at a starting lineup in an NBA team, if you're talking regular season versus postseason, is if you have a player that's below average, start asking yourself who they're going to be facing off against. My favorite example of this, and this wasn't even below average players, this was above average players, but it was the San Antonio Spurs against the 73-win Golden State Warriors. If you looked at both of these teams on paper, they were plus 10 SRS teams, which is among the best ever. But then the Spurs got, I'll put in quotes, upset by the Oklahoma City Thunder, except what I ended up doing, this is a very simple experiment, is I ignored position entirely. I just took the players, took their minutes, right? So I took all the players that the Oklahoma City Thunder played. This is players like Russell Westbrook, Steven Adams, Kevin Durant, because he was still on the team at that time. I took all the players that the Spurs played. Tim Duncan, I think, was still active, obviously Kawhi. And so I compared them against each other. And their numbers came up about the same, because in the playoffs, right, where the Spurs had this monumentous edge against the Oklahoma City Thunder in the regular season, because as you started going down, right, fine, Kevin Durant lines up with Kawhi and Russell Westbrook lines up with Tim Duncan, et cetera, et cetera. When you got back to the 8th or 9th guy on the list, the Thunder lost out because the Spurs would have Marco Bellinelli. But then when you get to the playoffs, well, the Thunder aren't going to play their 8th guy. They're just going to leave Russell Westbrook in, and Russell Westbrook versus Bellinelli is way better, and Russell Westbrook versus, as I was saying, like Tim Duncan is still better than him there. So that's where you make it up. So that's why Brook Lopez is kind of a glaring flaw on that team, depending on how they want to go, because in the regular season, him being marginally worse than a lot of teams, because we compare to average, he's a little bit below average. But if you're a playoff team, you're already above average in the NBA.
Yes, this is the most important point.
So playoff teams tend to already be a little bit better, right? So they're going to be a little bit above average. And then they're going to be players on those playoff teams that are above it. So now the marginal difference between Brook Lopez and an average NBA team in the regular season is much different than between Brook Lopez against an average starter in the playoffs who is now also going to be playing more minutes than they would in the regular season.
Yeah, and another thing about Brook Lopez is I think he's deceptive because he makes sense for the Bucks from a Moneyball perspective. And here's
He's
what I'm.
Yeah, he's absolutely dirt cheap.
Well, yeah, not just his price. I mean, in terms of the way you like to call moneyballing it, right? Like buying stats. Like we're going to replace, Jason Giambi with Hatterberg and a few other guys, replace their stats, even though we can't replace them as a star, right? So the reason Brook Lopez makes sense as a center that can't rebound but can block shots and shoot threes, but not do too much else, is because of the other players they have, right? Like they have a Giannis who's like a 7-foot small forward. He can rebound, You have Eric Bledsoe, who's a really good rebounding point guard. He's basically as good at rebounding, just straight up per minute. Let's take a look. Let's go to the Boxscore Geeks player comparison tool there, and let's compare Eric Bledsoe to Brook Lopez. Let's do it live. We have Eric Bledsoe, we have Brook Lopez, and let's see who's the better rebounder. I think they're about the same. But let's find out.
Winner is between Eric Bledsoe and Brook Lopez.
We're loading a little bit slow here. Good thing we're going to have this cloud optimization pretty soon. Okay, so Brook Lopez actually is a slightly better per minute rebounder than Eric Bledsoe at 7.8, and Bledsoe's at 7.6. But one guy's 7 feet tall and the other's closer to 6. That's kind of ridiculous. So the point is they can still be a good rebounding team with a bad rebounding center just because their other players are so good at it. But here's the problem with that logic. If they just had a good center, they could just have all of this, right? Maybe they won't have a 36% three-point shooting center like they have from Brook Lopez, but they can just let their other players that are just as good as at that shoot more threes. Like, for instance, when Kevin Durant's been hurt lately on the Warriors, Steph Curry's just taking a lot more shots, right? You can just replace those shots. So, of course, it's better, for the long run to have more options and more depth. But, they could do better than Brook Lopez. That's all.
I definitely agree with that take. All right, we're going to talk. Okay, next one I put the Warriors are fine, OMG. The reason I put this on, Brian, I think. Okay, I'll just go kind of straightforward. I saw a headline. I didn't even bother reading the article, but it said something akin to, after a compelling win against the Thunder, are the Warriors back on track to defend their title? And I kind of rolled my eyes because the Warriors are the best team in the Western Conference, and the Warriors have already beat the Oklahoma City Thunder one time before this season. This is a good team. I understand the need to make a narrative, and we talk about this a lot, and it's definitely a subject I'll revisit at some point, either in article form or just talking about on the podcast, where I see so many comparisons to wrestling in basketball. And this, I got this idea. It's an earworm I got from a cracked video way back in the day. It was Michael Swayman, one other guy. And they were talking about how a lot of professional sports, basketball included, stole essentially a lot of what wrestling did in the 80s to get popular, which is you kind of have these over-the-top characters, these over-the-top narratives, David Stern was a villain as the commissioner, which was kind of mimicking Vince McMahon as a villain commissioner in wrestling. And in wrestling, what we have is they're known as heels and baby faces. So you have heels, they're the villains that we boo. Baby faces, they're the heroes that we root, because wrestling is essentially a soap opera. The way it goes on forever, because, wrestling has essentially, like the WWE as an example, has existed contiguously for, I think, all the way back to the AWA, and I forget all of the territories or whatever. But if you track it back, it's older than the NBA. So you've basically had this long-running storyline going that's pretending it's a professional sport, but it's a soap opera in the world of a professional sport. And what they do is they're known as heel turns and face turns. So the villains that we hate do something noble, so they become heroes. The heroes that we love do something dastardly, so they become villains. When we examine why they're called heroes and villains, it can get amusing and an indictment on the United States population. As an example, right now, as you've noted to me, Daniel Bryan is considered a villain, a heel, because he is arguing that we really need to be worried about climate change and recycling, is what it is. United States is a fucked up place, people. We rock. Okay, so the same thing happens in sports, I find. In basketball, we just really, as fans, want narratives, and we basically we make heels, we make baby faces, and we swap them just because we want a narrative to fit. And when people do this, they will ignore storylines. So with the Warriors, the problem is they've been a dominant squad that is still a really good squad. And that's a boring story. We were already talking 2 years ago, Brian, how the Warriors were a great team that should have won a title, that got some bad luck, that has come back stronger than ever, that is still the easy favorite to win the title. But we are still seeing articles about like, oh my goodness, can Kevin Durant and Steph Curry gel? This was like in the first year they were together. We were going, people just want a narrative. And it's the same thing now, right? Saying this is still a good squad. And unlike other good squads that have fallen apart due to age and injury, this squad, they're all, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, and I just dropped one. I dropped Klay Thompson, I guess. Are all still pretty young. They're all still pretty healthy. This is still a really good team. That's a boring narrative. So you want to start creating narrative. I've said the same thing. LeBron James has done so many heel and face turns. He's basically the Big Show. That's your wrestling reference for all of you wrestling fans out there. We just want to create a narrative around him. But the Warriors, they're fine. I am not worried about the Warriors in the slightest. The only way I'm going to be worried about the Warriors is if Steph Curry or Kevin Durant gets injured in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's right. And, I mean, for all this stuff, the way narratives go, I guess the reason why I get frustrated with them is because, especially when it comes to basketball, I get into this real, Bayesian kind of mindset, right? And what I mean by that is when people say, Cousins is hurt or the Warriors are bad on defense or something, there's a 0% chance they can win. Or they say, oh, Cousins is healthy, they're good on defense, there's a 100% chance they can win. We know that's bogus because what we should really be saying is, well, who's the favorite? It's probably the Bucks. Warriors are probably, I don't know, second or third favorite. And what are those actual odds? If you look at all the teams, it's at this point 20 or 30%, something like that. So you just have to line up all the teams and look down. And that's just not a narrative people want to look at. They want to say this team is the best or the worst, right? So let's look at the game log real fast. Why are we in this mindset right now? The last two games, Dre, games 67 and 68 for the Warriors. We're getting near the end of the season. They beat Houston and Oklahoma City on the road. They blew out Oklahoma City. They barely beat Houston, but Houston kind of came back at the end. Really, they were beating them up pretty well for most of that game. They look dominant, right? So what are the narratives in the news right now? I just did a Google search for Golden State and clicked on the news tab, right? So what are the headlines for the Warriors right now? Mercury News, that's a local newspaper. Can anyone in the West challenge Golden State? This is just based on these two games, right? Where's another one? Blue Man Hoop. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and yeah, to your exact point, last week when we were talking on the show, the sky is falling. Is Cousins ruining chemistry, right? All of this stuff. So yeah, for me, it's kind of this will feed into a bigger narrative when we get to the hot hand point. But it's just like, when you look at the aggregate, that's what you really have. You have to say, what players can they not afford to lose? Because I do hate when people say injuries happen to every team. I'm sorry, there's a big difference between an injury to LeBron James and an injury to Eric Bledsoe. But just obviously.
And just to finish up real fast on this, if you go back to last week, they lost 4 out of 6 games, right? This is where the sky is falling. They can't play defense. Cousins sucks. All that was coming from. Then if you go before that, they won 10 games in a row directly before that. And everyone was saying the same thing. They're invincible. So are they the best team ever this week, a terrible non-playoff team last week, and then the best team ever the week before that? Is it just fluctuating how good they are? Not really. It's just variance, and the narratives are ridiculous. So that's all I have to say on that.
Agreed. All right, so this one, I'm going to give a throwback to an old article and just a weird observation. So I always forget their names, even though we discussed them pre-show, Brian, but there are some notorious refs out there that everybody seems to know. It's Scott Foster, and Brothers is the last name. The first name is...
Tony Brothers. Those are two refs that, a lot of people think are inconsistent.
And what happened recently this last week, the Denver Nuggets were playing the Indiana Pacers, and the Nuggets won. Woohoo. But Nikola Jokic was ejected for getting a second technical foul late in the fourth quarter in a very close game where obviously missing Nikola Jokic for 5-6 minutes in the fourth quarter in a close game and it really matters, for playoff seeding, right? Indiana Pacers are a top 4 seed. Denver Nuggets are a huge thing. And lots of people that I respect on Twitter, they were all talking about it at the time, were going, these refs are notoriously known for calling games hard. And we're even saying, like, in the playoffs last year, the favorites would win 16, were like 16-3 in these games, and the 3 games were all Scott Foster or Tony Brothers. Or this player's only been this many times, they were all brothers. And what's interesting about that is you could make the argument that these refs are going for the NBA's best interest in things like elongating playoff series or fighting against small market teams, which I know my next subject too is going to be about conspiracy theories, Brian, but gets into conspiracy theory territory. But what I want to throw out to is 5-6 years ago at this point, almost 6 years ago, geez, Brian, I went to the Western Economics Association, and Ryan Rodenberg, I don't know if he's still a professor at Florida State University, but he was there. He gave a talk on how it is actually, there is nothing strictly from a legal standpoint. I'm going to say legal standpoint than illegal, so that's kind of redundant. There is nothing illegal about any league telling their referees how they would prefer them to call a game, even if it impacts the odds of an outcome.
You quote a line that says, no federal law definitely prohibits it.
Now, it's possible that's changed in the last 6 years. I haven't looked into that. But it's just interesting to note that, yeah, if the NBA says Denver is a small market team, we'd really rather have Houston at that number 2 seed, which makes a lot of sense. Houston is a much bigger market. Houston, I mean, as much fun as the Denver Nuggets fans are having, and I'm one of these, in saying Nikola Jokic is getting snubbed by the mainstream for like MVP consideration. And my argument is I don't expect him to even come close, right? My top 3, it's very simple. Giannis, Harden, George. One of those 3, those should be your top 3. I don't care about the order as long as Giannis is number 1. Those are your top 3. Jokic should get some consideration, at least 1 or 2 number 1 votes from like local beat writers. So, yeah, it actually makes sense, but this just pops into my head because it's interesting to have these refs that we know about that, like, it's kind of a running joke. And this does remind me of the Tim Donaghy scandal. For those that don't remember, Tim Donaghy was a referee that was arrested, another FBI sting, for fixing NBA games. And he was. And what ended up happening during his time while he was doing that is that gamblers noticed that games that he reffed, the odds would move by like over a point on the line, which for reference, that is the same as a star getting injured. If I tell you right now James Harden gets injured, the line in Vegas is going to move at least a point. So that is huge, right? The lines for games that people knew Tim Donaghy was refereeing would move over a point, and that's with no other news, which is astounding. But it also means that gamblers caught on, and Scott Foster's and Tony Brothers seem to be at this point, at least on Twitter feeds that I noticed with some gamblers that I follow, are kind of just a running joke about that. Now, you could argue some fear about the Tim Donaghy scandal. The NBA did a very good job. We talked a little bit about this last week. I was very disjointed about it, but we were talking about the social media era. And essentially the right way to get out of things in the social media era is if you get in trouble to just shut up. This is our advice from the Boxscore show. It really sucks. But if something blows up, you go viral, and you're like, I'm going to clear my name. I'm going to get on Twitter, and I'm going to explain what I did wrong. No. Lock your tweets. Shut the hell up. Lay low. That seems to be the one effective strategy that seems to have worked in the social media era. And so, for example, the NBA did have a referee that was fixing games with links to legalized crime. Or not legalized crime, organized crime. Slight difference, right? Organized crime is a little different than legalized crime. Legalized crime is like getting your
kid. Well, this is 2019, Dre, so I can make a lot of jokes about that, but I hear you.
That's true. With links to organized crime, and what the NBA did was they just basically put their head in the sand and were like, no, and have done it. I'm impressed by how effectively they buried it, given how big that story was. So I'm not saying these referees are doing anything that innocuous, but the rules actually say if the NBA just tells these 2 refs, hey, these are the teams we want in the playoffs, these would be the best for ratings. At least as recently as 5 years ago, there was nothing strictly wrong with that, and it seems to be unfortunate if you're a Nuggets fan, because for whatever reason, the NBA is not a fan of the Nuggets.
Yeah, and I really like these Ryan Rodenberg points. So this has always kind of been a thing in the NBA, Dre, and by that I mean conspiracies. The first ones that I kind of remember really getting a lot of play was I think it's the 1985 draft where Patrick Ewing went to the Knicks. Everyone said,
Yep.
"Oh, that lottery was rigged because they wanted the star, to go to the big city." And it's like there's no way to really disprove that. It's not illegal. There's no way to audit it, and it's probably not true. But who knows, right? We can't prove it. Tim Donaghy is a great example. And when you're talking about Scott Foster and Tony Brothers, the one example I always remember is Dick Bavetta, right? I looked this up when you were talking. He was a ref for 39 years until he retired in 2014. So unless you're just a very recent NBA fan, you probably remember him, including he famously raced Charles Barkley in the playoffs and all that. So everyone remembers Dick Bavetta. But there is a conspiracy theory about Dick Bavetta, which is when there was some game that the league really needed some team to win, they would always assign Dick Bavetta to that game because he was a company guy, right? Who knows if that's true, but after Donaghy, it's hard to say it's not true.
Well, it's also from the Patrick Ewing perspective, and we've already been talking this will lead us into our next subject nicely, Brian. I don't think that was a bad strategy to say this guy is the top player coming out of the draft. He's a popular name. He's probably going to help out a team. Let's put him in the biggest, we've got LA covered. We've got LA covered. We've got Chicago covered. We've got Boston covered. Let's get New York. That's a good strategy. We hate Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota, Anthony Davis in New Orleans. That is such a waste of talent. Even Giannis in Milwaukee is terrible. It would make so much more sense for Giannis to be in Chicago, to be honest.
Here's where I'll draw the difference, so just briefly, Dre, sorry for interrupting, but Anthony Davis does not want to be in New Orleans, but Giannis does want to be on the Bucks. So at least they should just be able to choose, if they could choose to be on a small market team, fine. But right now they can't. They have no agency over that.
We have no way of knowing if he wants to be on the Bucks because he had no agency in going to them initially.
Yeah. It's been reported recently he's really happy there, but you're right, we don't know.
Although I am already starting to see whispers about is he still going to be here in 2 years, which I'm definitely cracking up on. I'm like, they've still got him for 2 more years. Let's revisit this in 2 years.
Exactly.
Okay, but so like I don't have a problem with that Patrick Ewing point. And then also Ewing, I always mess that up. But then also like for this upcoming season, I wouldn't have a fault with them putting Zion on the Lakers. And so here's my conspiracy theory territory subject, and just noticing 2 interesting things that's happened. In this last week, LeBron James was blocked by Mario Hezonja on a last-second potential game winner. And everybody's like, oh my goodness, LeBron James, he's old, he's beat up. Now, admittedly, he had a 28 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists game or something like that. Just a standard, amazing LeBron James game, if I recall. Didn't make a top 10 box score of the week, is what it is. But was still a reasonably good NBA game. And, sadly, the players that pained me, I looked that game up. The players that made me sad were like Josh Hart, Rajon Rondo, which is sad. But anyway, LeBron James did fine, but he was blocked at the last second. I was watching the play, and I was going, what if LeBron James knew it was a close game? Because we've seen him. He has like a computer brain where he like memorizes all the plays. What if it was 33 points, Brian? 33 points, 8 assists, 6 rebounds. It's not LeBron James's fault they lost that game. But anyway, what if he knows the game? They're down by 1. He like drove past Kyle Kuzma, who's open at the corner 3. He drove straight at Hezonja. He jumped up in the air and he waited, and then he like basically fell and then hit the ball like later than I would have. He like tried to do like a pump fake and then got blocked. Now, the easy answer is he's older, he was tired, it was a long game, and he got blocked. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? He's still a great player, but a player at 34 is not the same player they were at 27. A fun conspiracy theory, though, is LeBron James knew that losing the game helped their draft odds. Another game, New Orleans recently, they had a game where they were up. I think they were either tied or up by 2, and they messed up the inbound pass. Then they fouled the guy. Then instead of giving the foul, they let like a go-ahead 3 go, and then they messed something up and they lost the game by 3. So basically they had a game they could have tied or won, but they blew on some stupid play calling. As we've noted, both New Orleans and the Lakers are out of the playoffs, so in close games, there is nothing for them to play for. And if they've already played a close game, they've already given the fans what they want. So why the hell not just lose it at the last second? You give the fans some good excitement. Back to wrestling days, right? Like I was actually listening to like Chris Jericho on a Booker T podcast. So these are both big name wrestlers, both back in the day in WCW.
Harlem Heat just went into the Hall of Fame, by the way. Congrats to them.
Yep. Booker T was part of that. But so Booker T and Chris Jericho were talking, and they were noting that when you're a heel, like they were saying, right, the goal isn't to care about the win or loss, it's to care about how good the match is and how invested you get the fan in. So if you have a game that goes to overtime or is tied with a minute to go and then you lose it, but you increase your draft odds as a result, in LeBron James's case, as I brought up, he's aiming for the scoring records, right? I think he's at his normal rate, 30 to 40 games away from passing Kobe at this point. And Dirk Nowitzki might pass Wilt Chamberlain tonight on the all-time scoring list. I'm in conspiracy territory zone, and I hate it. But I mean, I've been writing about tanking the last couple of weeks. I could see these teams intentionally losing at the last second because people respond to incentives. I just talked about the draft. The other thing is the NBA finds teams when they don't like what they're doing. And it's somewhat arbitrary. When we talk about refs, this gets dumb. A player can get fouled and the ref can miss the call. The player can get upset that the ref missed the call and yell at the ref, hey, you missed that call. And the ref can say, hey, you're being disrespectful. That's a technical, which is so freaking arbitrary, right? And so we wind up in the same position where an NBA team can go, I want to tank. And the NBA basically via the draft lottery says, we think you should tank. And so the team tanks, the NBA says, we're going to fine you $200,000 for that. Because there have been some major fines for teams resting starters, et cetera. I think the word around the campfire is that the NBA was coming down pretty hard on the Pelicans when they were starting to try and shut down Anthony Davis because they were expecting either trade him or to shut him down for the season and trade him in the offseason, which is, still what we believe they're supposed to be doing. So teams don't want to get fined. So it's like, let's put on a good show so the NBA doesn't fine us, and then let's lose the game to help our draft lottery chance. The incentives are there for that to be a perfectly reasonable thing to think, and I'm mad that I get to think that way.
Yeah, and it's possible, like we were talking about. There's no laws against it. It could, NBA could theoretically be at work just like pro wrestling if it wanted to be. I think in LeBron's case, it's less likely. And here's the reason why. I think that for players and coaches, especially when they're the best of the best of the best, I think their egos are just too big to intentionally lose a game. Maybe not. Maybe LeBron is kind of above that at this point. I know you've said there's, maybe it's possible he doesn't care about winning anymore and he just wants to, be there to break the scoring record and, help his business or whatever. That's possible, but I still think an individual game they want to win, and they also I would bet the players puts more stock in themselves and their teammates who they probably like more than some random rookie. They're like, we don't need these rookies to win. We just need ourselves, right? So just knowing how these athletes' mindset are, I don't know if they would go for that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, the Easter Bunny's real too, Brian. Let's talk our biggest subject, which I think I'm only going to do a couple minutes on.
Yeah, that's fine.
So you've got an interesting article from Todd Whitehead about the hot hand, and what I love about it is it's interesting two-part. You said there's a really good graphic, which I agree with, and it basically is kind of saying what we want, which is saying that Clay. So here's what you've got at the bottom of this Todd Whitehead article. The graphic, I'm sure, which is why you passed it along, is Klay Thompson proof that the hot hand exists? And so what we looked at is Klay Thompson after missing a shot versus after making a shot. And Klay Thompson, after missing 3 shots in a row, is 40%. Missing 2 in a row, 42%. Missing the previous one, 41%. So he's around 40%. Now he makes three 3-pointers in a row, 43%. Made 2 previous in a row, 43%. Made 3 in a row, 45%. So that seems very impressive.
And another pointer is he's a 42% career shooter. So the idea is, 45 is 3% over his career, basically.
So the way I phrased this to you, we brought it up pre-show and on the script, is there are 2 subjects that come up all the time in analytics that me, Brian. I'm just like, who gives a fuck? And that's the hot hand and clutch. And the reason I'm this way is they are a small part of the sport and so noisy that they're not what you should be measuring. One of my favorite quotes from Billy Beane is when he said, my shit don't work in the playoffs. Yep. By that, what he meant is that when he was constructing a team, he was just saying, I want this team to get this many runs and give up this many runs, and I want to maximize that to get the best team. That was his goal. And that's the right way to go about it. And in the playoffs, right, it's especially in baseball where they have like a best of three in some of the rounds, right? They have like best of three in some of the early rounds. Sometimes it's just a playoff to get into the playoffs. It's like a one-game playoff. Random noise can come in, and baseball is way more noisy, right? Like your pitcher can pitch amazing. Two guys get on base, and a guy gets a fluke home run, right, that barely goes over the wall. That would be a foul ball. Could be a foul ball in another field. Baseball's stupid. And that's the difference. That was his point. So in basketball, when you're constructing a team, I basically go for what I call the Brian bins of productivity after you, which is you look for things like rebound, shooting, etc. You go, I want to maximize these categories to get a team that's as good as possible and whatever. Now, for the hot hand, what bugs me, and this lets me get back to a popular subject I talk about all the time on the show, which is regression analysis, and then lets me get off on a tangent about movie grosses. Is when you are trying to control for something like Klay Thompson making multiple threes in a row versus not, you have to ask the other factors that could affect it. So we're talking Klay Thompson making 3 3-pointers in a row versus not. Here's a very simple question, and it comes up, often done incorrectly, but does come up in some analysis, which is who's guarding him? There is a big difference between Klay Thompson being guarded by someone who's not letting him get those 3-pointers off or making it very hard for him versus having a really bad matchup. So maybe the reason he made 3 3-pointers in a row is he has a bad matchup or health or time of the game, et cetera, right? There are a number of variables that can impact why Klay is shooting that well that in theory you have to control for. And the reason we start to get upset with that as a rabbit hole to dig down is you often end up with very small samples, right? Because I might have just said bad matchup, bad defender versus good defender, time of the game, whatever. And so now I'm asking, like, give me the number of times Klay Thompson took 5 3-point shots in a game, well covered by this player on a team with this matchup, with the game this close, right? That might be the question at hand. Or, well, Steph, how Steph Curry's shooting affects that too, right? The Warriors, one of their benefits is they have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant. They could just wait, whatever player's shooting well gets to take more shots. So without controlling for all of that stuff, you can't really know. So while this is interesting, it does boil down to a lot of the analysis I see, on-off included, where I go, there is so much other stuff to control for that while this is interesting, I don't think it's answering the question you want. And some of the studies, this was also from the Western Economics Association back in the day, their takeaway from hot hand shooting was if you made simulations of the hot hand existing versus the hot hand not existing, you couldn't really differentiate them, if that makes any sense. Saying the hot hand might be undetectable. And I think that's the important part. I think there's a big hope to look for the hot hand. There was a paper at Sloan that said essentially the following things happen with a hot hand. Player gets hot. Player notices it, so player starts doing what's known as a heat check. They start taking more shots.
Klay loves doing that, by the way.
Defense notices it, starts covering them more closely. So now, like I just said, in terms of what you're controlling for the quality of the type of shot they're taking, how tough the defense is covering them, that becomes a much different question. So this is definitely interesting, but for a 42% shooter saying when he's shooting really well, he averages 44%, and when he's shooting poorly, he averages 40.5%, I don't know what that gives you.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all that. And just to kind of fill out a little bit more about where he goes in the article here, another problem with it is so you're referencing that data of Klay's actual career, right? And 42% versus 45% when he's taken 3 in a row. Well, here's the next line that he writes after that, he being Todd Whitehead. It turns out that even when considering Thompson's entire career, 8 seasons, 600 games, 4,183 three-pointers and counting, the number of three-point attempts that followed long streaks of makes or misses was too small to provide meaningful information, right? Not significant enough. And that makes sense, right? How often are you attempting, a fourth 3 after you've made 3 in a row? Not too often, right? Even in this day and age. So So what does he do? He does exactly what you were saying that other team did. He writes the simulation.
Do you want to hear something embarrassing, Brian? I apologize. When you sent this to me the first time, I thought that the Golden State Warriors courtside crate ad with the little thing there, I thought that was the end of the article.
Oh, okay.
I feel effing stupid because, as you know, just scrolling down, and you were just talking, does exactly what I asked and says exactly what I'm asking. Basically saying there's a 1 in 5 chance that this based, and again, this is based on computer simulations. We can't guarantee those are perfect.
Yeah. So what the computer simulations are is he basically said, if I make a bunch of fake careers for Klay Thompson, which are the same, which he shoots 42%, which is 8 years long and whatever, and in which the hot hand does not exist. He's assuming it does not exist for this simulation. What he says is basically only 20% of the time, out of all these fake seasons, would you expect Klay to be a hotter shooter than he is in real life. So what he concludes in the end is basically, based on the amount of data we have, we just can't know if there's a hot hand or not. There's not enough data. And he did one more thing too, which I like, which is that he looked at people similar to Klay Thompson and really different. And by that I mean is players that are either really cold after taking three or really hot. And so Klay Thompson is up there at the top of being one of the most hot hand players. This chart is who's got the hottest hand. Who else is up there? Baron Davis is tied with Eric Gordon and Klay Thompson up there. We've also got CJ McCollum up there as well. So why am I mentioning this? I think this has to, and you're going to have to remind me what this new stat that you're working on with Art Rondo is called. But I think that people are biased towards these players being good versus their actual body work because they have these hot shooting performances, and this gets on to ESPN, right? But it's not significant.
The statistic is called the Rondo ratio.
Ah, thank you.
And essentially, there also is, I'm going to have to compare the two. In stats, there's actually a statistical test you can do called skewness, which is measuring the same thing, which is basically when you look at production, you want to see how much of it is basically lumped in the top versus like a normal distribution. And so I think you're absolutely right, though, with Klay versus this. And I feel embarrassed, Brian, because I tried to do my due diligence and read the article. I read half of it. So all mine, I'm going to give an A+ to this article because basically as you noticed, my complaint about this article, Todd Whitehead answers it at the end, and it comes to the same conclusion I do. So
in your defense, he does say at the end that despite it being inconclusive, he personally wants the hot hand to be real, so he's eating the red pill. Kind of a meme way to end it, but yeah, he does do his due diligence.
This is the stat. You're saying, I'm a sports fan. I like this. I want to believe this, but I did the numbers. Here's what the numbers say, and here's how I'm going to choose to go about it. This is A+ work.
Yeah, so we criticize all kinds of articles on, Nylon Calculus and other sites, but I do like to give credit to the authors that we like, and Todd White has one of them, so I love this article.
Yes, we agree. And I mean, what we've also said is anytime you have any site that has multiple authors and multiple things, and then also the same author, when they're under a deadline, can produce much different articles when they have to just come up with something on the fly. So, this one gets great graphics, great everything, as long as you're not an idiot like Dre and assumes that it ends halfway through. And for whatever reason would say, so let's ask a computer. I was like, yeah, it's a weird way to end an article, but weird. Okay. I was going to compare this to something else, though, to the exact same point I was making. So while he does do the simulation thing, my point was you have to control for a number of factors. Now, the internet's a weird place, Brian. I want to explain what happened this last week. So for those, to date ourselves, Captain Marvel was released the second week of March and is doing gangbusters. It made $250 million U.S. and international its first weekend. It's on pace to do amazing. And what happened is Robert Liefeld, who is the co-creator of Deadpool, that's an auspicious honor because Deadpool is a ripoff of a character named Deadshot from the Teen Titans in DC. So saying he created that character is kind of like saying Pepsi is the creator of a cola. But anyway. But
the character was kind of like a parody in his defense, right? So he even though created it, you're right, it was a parody.
Anyway. So what ended up happening was Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld. Sorry about that. I got distracted quickly. Rob Liefeld wrote he was shocked that Captain Marvel's the next Monday after this amazing weekend, it was 150 million locally, like 200 million internationally, right? That it had a really weak Monday. It was like only 10 million on a Monday. And so what I did is I just went to last year, the exact same Monday, corresponding Monday, right? So it was like March 17th this year. So I went back to last year's, either March 18th or March 16th. There's a site I really like called the-numbers.com. So I went back in time to that and just said, hey, what did the movie box office last Monday look like? And the top movie that year was Black Panther, and I think it was only at 4 million. And I just went, hey, just an FYI, last year, the number one movie at the box office the same Monday of the year was only at this amount. So I'm not sure of other trends, but I don't know if I'd be worried about Captain Marvel just yet, just because it seems like it makes complete sense that the time of year matters for the movie. And that's kind of, when we're talking regression analysis, one of my points, because he came back and said, Black Panther made, 40 million its first Monday. This is completely ridiculous, and it gets really weird. I'm going to see if I can find the complete thing, because it's a couple days back with Rob Liefeld responding to me. But essentially, what he missed is I was saying, I know from a fact with movie grosses, the time of year matters for how well a movie does, and the reason that Black Panther matters, as an example, is that was a holiday weekend. So Black Panther's first Monday after its opening weekend was a holiday weekend where kids are off school and went to see it. And for instance, this year, the Lego Movie 2 just absolutely crushed the box office that Monday, did better than Black Panther did, as a matter of fact, because of that. And so when I was talking about this article, the hot hand and all the different things you have to control for, and ending up in movie grosses, what I get amused by is that exact thing. When you're talking movie grosses, I know a popular one that people rightly know about is inflation adjusted. Are you controlling for the cost of tickets? As an example, a lot of new movies make themselves 3D to go into IMAX because IMAX tickets are more expensive. You get to charge more for IMAX tickets. Your gross goes up, even though you didn't necessarily fill as many seats as other movies. That is a difference that people have talked about. But with Captain Marvel, just the time of year it came out matters a lot. And what I actually ended up doing, Brian, I'll see if I can get you this link. I
have it up right now, yeah.
Using the numbers, do you have the chart? So the numbers is awesome. You can compare up to 6 movies at a time. I just went back in time and looked at every superhero movie that was released in March over the last decade. This is The Hunger Games, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Logan, Captain Marvel, and 300 Rise of an Empire, and compared them. And it's kind of hard. Captain Marvel, since it's so new, it kind of gets hidden. But essentially, Captain Marvel's domestic gross is tracking very well with The Hunger Games, which was the most successful superhero movie released in March. So to my basic point to Liefeld is like, and I didn't get into much more. I'm not going to explain regression analysis to Rob Liefeld. This is already weirder. I did not expect to get into an argument about movie grosses with Rob Liefeld. So I'll leave it at that, especially since I believe Deadpool still holds the distinction of being the top grossing R-rated movie. So it's like you feel weird. I'm going to lecture the guy that's part of the history books for movie grosses. I'm going to lecture him on movie grosses. I'm like, I don't want to go there. But I had to make this chart because it's going, this movie, Captain Marvel, is doing amazing. And when you want to compare a movie for how it's doing, you do have to factor in these other things. And another obvious thing to look at, and I love the numbers because it has this too, is production budget. So Captain Marvel was on a production budget of 152 million. Batman v Superman, as an example, 250 million. So that's a huge discrepancy already. And the last major point about Captain Marvel, and I'm really, really, really interested to see where it ends up, is international. It is doing amazingly well international. That was actually something that shocked me about The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, as this chart showed, best movie domestically of all the superhero movies. But internationally, didn't do that hot. And as a result, Batman v Superman actually won internationally at the box office. Captain Marvel has started off remarkably hot internationally, so I really want to see where it ends up. And I'll also give that as a last note, Brian, because we always call it like the Brian magnitude test. In arguing movie grosses with people, I always get amused by how egocentric the United States is. Because we'll see a movie do poorly domestically, and we're like, this movie was a flop. And if you look up internationally, a lot of these movies do, like Batman v Superman, did amazingly well internationally, right? Batman v Superman made over $500 million in made twice its budget back in the international market. And we're getting to the point because the United States arguably is saturated as a box office market. And if anything is going down, right, with streaming, et cetera, better home entertainment systems, et cetera, is going down. We've arguably reached peak money you can make from the U.S. on a box office movie with a downhill trend. Whereas internationally, you have lots of markets that aren't even necessarily tapped that might be in an uphill trend. So when you see people going, this movie did really bad in the United States, I'm worried about it. Like for Captain Marvel, anybody going, Captain Marvel, that Monday was underwhelming, which, by the way, like I said, I went back in time, and for March, it's a perfectly fine Monday. If it had done that well on a summer weekend, on a summer Monday, or on a 3-day weekend holiday, yes, you could be worried. But in March, lots of other superhero movies basically did just as bad, if not worse. In fact, the only movies when I was looking through this that did better on a Monday were essentially Disney movies like Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, the live action remakes of them. So for superhero movies, this movie did fine. But the real question, the real thing you want to look at for Captain Marvel's international, and internationally, Captain Marvel says all of your criticisms are invalid. This movie is a success.
Yeah, and you know what this reminds me of for recent movies is the Warcraft movie. That movie came out a few years ago, and it got destroyed by critics. And whatever, it wasn't. I liked it, but it was pretty bad. But regardless, it didn't do very well in the U.S. It was expensive, and it was kind of put in this category of, oh man, here's this big IP franchise, and they just screwed up the movie, and that was a debacle, But you know who really likes Warcraft in addition to Americans? China. China loves Warcraft. The Warcraft movie did gangbusters in China, and now they're making a sequel, even though it was destroyed by critics. So, yeah, that's a big example of how that can happen.
That's a fun one to look at. The numbers has some great data that if I wasn't already so busy with I've got like 4 basketball stats projects I'm behind on, Brian, at this point. 47 million locally, 378 internationally. That is such
for Warcraft.
For Warcraft, I'm looking at what you're saying. That is such a huge skew, local versus international.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean we always talk about, like I said, your magnitude test when you ask things how much things matter. That is definitely a huge thing to consider is how much, I think people leave out international. And that's the same thing. I know Waterworld is widely used as a movie that failed. It's used as one of the biggest flops, but I believe it's the same situation. Like the numbers has all of these, so I'm looking up Waterworld real quick. Or Capper. But I believe Waterworld did fine. Yeah, Waterworld, 88 million locally, 176 internationally. So it's not a super success, right? It didn't make back a ton of money, but arguably it made back its budget internationally. Then you basically take the domestic gross and like any home video sales, and it's fine. So yeah, I think the key and the reason I brought this up in relation to sports statistics is, when you are doing analysis, that is what you have to look at. You have to look at other factors that affect things. You have to ask, what is the magnitude of this thing? And I find too many people don't. They go, this movie did really bad on a Monday in the United States, and they leave out the time of year or how well it's doing overseas. And I think it does apply a lot to the right way to do data analysis. The same with like rebounds, right? When people focus on a player's good or bad game, if you leave out the bad statistics, if you leave out the context of that game, that's where we get players like Klay Thompson being considered great.
Yeah, and I remember the Waterworld released very well, and I think you're right about the narratives. It cost a lot of money to make. They filmed it actually out at sea, which, for people that don't know about film production, that never happens, right? Jaws did it in the 70s, and that almost caused the movie to flop and not get made, but they kind of miraculously pulled it out and kind of changed summer blockbusters forever. And no one really did it since then up until Waterworld, and the production was a disaster. And again, just like Warcraft, the critics destroyed it. They hated it. So here's an expensive movie that no one liked. Clearly it's a failure. Well, yeah, you actually have to look at the box office.
Yep, exactly. All right, well, we've definitely gone long, Brian. I'll let that be our show. I'm not even going to do any shout-outs. I'm going to say we've had a long show, Brian. I'll just end us.
I'll have a quick shout-out to Captain Marvel just as a movie. I enjoyed it so much, and it was very formulaic, but it was so well made. So if you've not seen it, I really liked it.
I'm looking forward to on video on demand.
There you go.
All right. Anyway, we've been the Box Score Geeks show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every Monday, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. Varies on time, so sometime between 7 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you want to catch us live. If you don't catch us live, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We also have a iTunes and Stitcher show, the Box Score Geeks show. Subscribe, upvote. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Box Score Brian. Good luck to your team in the playoffs, although if they're not in, they're probably out.